Tak ada. You guys very quiet lah. I patut make everyone to on their camera. Ada ke kat sini?
Ada.
Ada. Why you guys are so super quiet? Macam I'm talking to the wall. Okay, so if there are no questions, then we'll go right away into the class je lah. Okay, so for today, basically we'll touch on project planning. Okay, so there are several parts into project planning. Basically, project planning is the next phase after you have defined the project. So, but obviously, when we talk about project planning, it depends on which stakeholder. Okay, so for client project planning, it will involve starting from project inception. Okay, so very far at the front end until the very last part of the project. Okay, project closure ataupun handover and so on until there. And project planning also done by the consultant, but the consultant's project planning will start from the design lah. Okay, so design and maybe procurement system and so on. And contractor will start from the construction phase. Okay, so you will see that when we talk about project planning, every stakeholder, it depends on what is their interest. What do they want to see of their planning? So client would see the entire milestone daripada awal sampai hujung. But for contractor, just at starting from the construction. For designer, big chunk of it at the design stage, and probably several during the construction stage, especially when they need to join for the client consultant contractor meeting. Okay, so but throughout that, if the design has been completed at the front end during construction, not much involvement by the designers lah, basically. But kalau even if we talk about the designers yang heavily during construction, maybe will be the architect. Okay, so normally architect, in a normal project, there would be the representative of the client. Normally, if you don't have project management consultant dan sebagainya, then your architect plays quite a huge role. Okay. All right, so at the end of this, you should be able to understand there are several stages in planning. Okay, so and there are aspects to be planned in construction and the steps in scheduling. Okay, so you will first need to plan, identify the activities, then only you can create a schedule. So the schedule is the input of the time factor. Okay, so duration. So schedule is where you can get in numbers. But planning itself, they're not in numbers. It's in the form of planning activities without the numbers. So when activity incorporated with numbers with the duration, itu yang wujud schedule tu. Okay. All right. So okay, so planning, what does planning mean? It can mean I do not have like a definition, but in general, planning is ongoing. So you would have a baseline planning, okay? So a baseline or a plan schedule or a benchmark. So that will be the schedule that you will stick. Okay, you need to stick to. So you would have been derived if for a contractor, you would have been derived based on the activities that you require. Okay, so from your drawing, from your specification, from the contract duration that has been given to you, you need to come up with a schedule yang lengkap. Right, so you have a baseline, but you need to monitor. Okay, so your current progress, how does it reflect ataupun compare with what you have actually planned for? If your planning berubah, okay, so if your baseline plan tu berubah, then you will never achieve the goal. Sebab you keep changing it. But you need to have as-built planning. you need to see what you have actually achieved, compare balik dengan the baseline, and make strategic changes. Because in a construction, you can't get perfect as it is. Okay, so it's quite difficult for you. Okay, concreting, I want to complete. Okay, these few slabs. Sometimes it might rain, sometimes you have workers not turning up, sometimes the material insufficient, sometimes there are misalignment in the installation of rebar. So those things, and when there are misinstallation, probably your resident engineer requires you to change it. Okay, the defect lah. Okay, so you will need to redo the rebar arrangement and so on. So quite a lot of things that could take place there. Okay, so that's why it's an ongoing process of defining the organization objective and goal. You have a baseline plan, but you will need to ensure that your daily plan, your weekly, your fortnightly plan, it goes back to your baseline. And there are changes, you need to work on planning and ensuring that it goes back to the required progress too. Okay. So establishing an overall strategy to achieve those goals. Okay, so basically we plan to achieve those. And for government project, it requires to submit work program according to their contract sum. So this one has been done quite a while lah. Okay, so the projects or all the construction projects are required to submit in form of Microsoft project or Primavera. Okay, so basically nobody plans to fail, but everybody fails to plan. Well, nowadays people do plan. Okay, so this quote might be relevant if you're talking about years, decades ago. But nowadays people do plan. Okay, so the only problem is whether do we work the plan? That's the problem. Okay, so we do have sophisticated software, sophisticated tools to assist us in planning. Okay, so we can do planning, no problem with that. Okay, but the problem is one, whether do we adhere to the planning? Okay, so do we actually get ourselves committed to ensure that, okay, this is the plan, we achieve that? That is one thing. Another one is maybe we have done that. We try to execute as much as we can. Cuma ada faktor-faktor luaran. Okay, external factors that give way to us. So we might have gone beyond this. Okay, so people do plan. But there are people who do not plan. Okay, for those who do not plan, that is the biggest problem. Okay, so it's like walking zombie macam tu. So you just move without thinking and just live day by day lah. Okay. Well, sometimes it's good to just live day by day because you don't need to think much. Okay, so you can just they like macam gypsies lah. Okay, so you can just live and just carefree. But you will reach one point whereby your carefree life would bring you nowhere. When you realize when one fine day you realize you will wake up and you realize that you are so bad. And sometimes to one point that we reach in life, we not something. We live to achieve something. It's quite difficult when if you go on with life and you just carefree and just how to say, you do not plan. So because you will reach one point that life is so boring when you don't plan, when you don't have what to expect tomorrow, what to expect the next day, what needs to be done. It will be quite boring. So it will be interesting that you have plan, you have activities, you know what to do, but at the same time, if you require break, then take your break. So there's no harm in that. So cuma make sure that you know what you are doing and you have intention, you have the right motivation to do something. Don't live your life without aimlessly. That's very important. Don't live your life aimlessly. You have to have something. Okay, so that it is meaningful. Okay, so same goes to your life, same goes to the task, same goes to any project you're handling. So, okay. Okay, so the planning process will answer this basic question. Okay, so what must be done? So what must be done would address benda apa. Okay, so when you are planning something, you need to know what must be done. You need to ask yourself, okay, when I'm planning for this project, I need to ask myself what must be done. So what must be done translated into one word, what do we call it? What do we identify from this question? Any suggestion? So what must be done? So what can we translate from there? What do we want to identify from this question? Any idea?
Timeline project.
Timeline. Timeline to when? When it must be done. When is the timeline? Okay, so yang ni, you have answered this. Okay, so kejap. Hold on eh. Okay, so when it must be done, you have answered timeline. When? Okay, bila? So timeline. What? Selain daripada tu?
Objective.
Okay, objective. Okay, more or less ada. Okay, so that's the aim of that. Okay, so what must be done will be based on the objective through the activities. Okay, so what must be done? You will need to go back to your objective. Okay, so we need to do the main thing we need to achieve. Sebenarnya, we need to achieve that objective. But what must be done untuk mencapai objektif tu? The activities. Okay, so you will need to identify, when you are planning, you will need to identify the activities. Okay, so what must be done? Alright, how it should be done? Apa? What are we trying to identify from our planning? How it should be done? Any idea how?
No idea.
No idea ke? Method kan? How? Macam mana kita nak buat sesuatu tu? Our approach, our method. Okay, so when we are planning, we need to ask ourselves what must be done. Okay, so what to be done untuk achieve a project. So what are the things we need to do? The activities. And once we identify the activities ni, how are we going to conduct those activities? So for example, the activities that you might identify for architectural works. You need to do roofing, you need to do painting, but how do we do that? Painting pun, you want to paint using brush ke? The method that you want to request your workers to guna spray ke? Okay, so method. How it should be done. How those activities should be done. So, method. Construction method. Okay, so construction approach, construction method. Concreting, for example. So what must be done? Activities such as slab concreting and so on. Okay, so what type of method? How should we do it? So concreting itself, sama ada, do you want to use, what do we call it? The delivery. Okay, so based on those concrete yang they send using truck, ataupun do you require the concrete silo at the site itself? So depending on the project. If it's a huge project, maybe it is quite inefficient to have these trucks going in and out from outside. So mungkin it will waste, maybe it's more expensive. So mungkin you need to build your own batching plant, temporary batching plant on the site. Particularly if your site is super huge. But if your site is just Small, normally you can see yang concrete truck ni moving in and out lah. Okay, so depending. Okay, all right. So who should do it? Who should do it?
Workers.
Okay, workers. Okay, contractors, subcons. Okay, so you need to identify all of this. Okay, so you have identified the activities. Okay, so you identify the construction method. So let's say you will be installing the batching plant. Okay, so you need to identify which contract to be given. Who are the subcontractors who's gonna build the or will be conducting the rebar. So who will be the carpenters for the formwork? Who will be doing the concreting? So the team yang berbeza-beza. Okay, but you need to know who will be doing what. So this is quite heavy. Okay, because every small trade though, okay, so concreting might differ from installation of rebar, and it will differ from formwork personnel. So mungkin subcon yang berbeza. Plumbing lagi berbeza, and then bricklaying might be different. So you have different subcon that will work on your different activities with the method that you have actually identified. Okay, but normally for main contractor, if you are planning, rarely that you will dictate the workers, okay, you paint using, rarely that you are going to tell the workers you paint using spray rather than using paint or using the roller. So normally not the main contractor's task lah. So normally the subcontractor will be dictating the workers, okay, what method will you be using, because you will supply the equipment to the workers and so on. Okay, but the main method, for example, concreting, so it should be set at this front end. Okay, so if it's using batching plant, then the batching plant lah. So you do not expect this tipper in and out of your site and so on. So quite a lot of changes, quite a lot of difference if you're talking about concrete daripada luar ke dalam ataupun the concrete within the site itself. Okay, so it will change the way you lay out your project and so on. Okay, so who should do it will be the arrangement of the workers, the contractors, the subcons and so on. Okay, so when it must be done, bila is your timeline. Okay, how much will it cost? Costing lah. Okay, so how much will it cost? Basically, the rental of equipment, machineries. Okay, so basically budgeting for each of the activity tu. Okay, so you come up with costing. Budgeting, costing. Okay. So typically these are the common questions that you will ask yourself when you are basically planning. So, and I think in fact, not only construction, if you're doing your project, your assignment, you will ask yourself what needs to be done here. Okay, so what do we need to do? How are we going to do it? Assignment based on who will be doing what, and then a schedule, when do we need to complete each of the tasks, and probably how much it costs. Maybe tak ada in your assignment, but if there are requirements, then you may put in there. Okay, so in construction management, okay, typically in a construction management, several parties plan. Okay, so I did mention this, that the planning might differ between different parties. The most complicated and comprehensive planning will be by the contractor. So because the contractor needs to plan element to element, it goes that detail. So the client does not need to know column A completed today, column B completed tomorrow. They don't need to know. But contractor, they need to know which column to concrete and which element to be installed before and so on. So for example, if your electrical items, okay, your conduits and so on, basically they are embedded in your slab because you tak nak yang superficial, what do you call, conduits, okay? You don't want all these electrical piping running on your wall, you not embedded, then it needs to be done before you concrete the slab. Okay, so sometimes we think that M&E comes later. Okay, so mechanical, electrical, all this comes later. But if the client requires everything embedded in your wall, in your slab, and so on, then it will need to come before you even concrete the slab, and before you even concrete the build the brick wall, you need to hack in and install it, embed it in the wall, and so on. Okay, so for planning, the contractor would have the most difficult planning because the sequencing though. So not everyone can do the sequencing. You need to have gone through experience. You would be able to see, imagine which item comes before which, because not necessarily M&E will be the last part. Tak. So it might come semasa even you are coming up with the slab. So structural work. So because sometimes we see building tu, okay, structure siap dulu. Mostly yes, okay, but some of the things you need to be very careful. Mungkin it comes together, so it needs to go hand in hand. So not necessarily at the end. Okay, so for the client is the schedule is at the major milestone. So it is not column to column concreting because the client does not need to know when the column to column concreting would be. So that is the job of the contractor. So their intention is siap ke belum by that date that you want to concrete that certain zone. Okay, so the client is interested on the overall. Okay, so probably could be as early as inception. Okay, so from the acquisition of land to productive use of the facility. Okay, so and in fact, I think I did mention about acquisition of land because some projects actually get delayed very long because of land acquisition. So this has to be carefully planned and carefully looked into at the project definition phase itself. So the risk should be highlighted to see, is it that difficult to get that land? Or is it that difficult to change the land status and so on? So because land, we are talking about owner themselves, and we are talking about local authority, we are talking about state governance and so on. So it is not as simple as we want to buy a land and the land is ours. Okay, so sometimes a project gets halt because of land acquisition. Okay, so this should be done, or this should be addressed at the front end itself. Okay, until the very end of it, productive use of the facility. Okay, so until the if the client is actually use, for example, MRT. Okay, so MRT would be interested from the acquisition, okay, of land across different different areas until the facility is being used. Okay, so they will be running the facility. So basically for this kind of client, the entire life cycle of the project. But for for client who does not look into the use until the end, okay. For example, all those Sunway, okay. So they have Sunway Hotel, complex that actually until the productive use of the facility. But if we are talking about residential, okay, so it will be passed on to the end user. House, for example. Okay, so the bill of a house, dia tak adalah use. Okay, so it will be passed on to the end user, the house owner on that. Okay, so then it might not be until the productive use. So it'll be until the handover. Okay, so depending on the client, some other, they will be using that, they will be maintaining that, or they are just until to the point, they pass on to the next user. Okay. but the milestone is not very detailed. I mean, the planning or the schedule, the activities might not be very detailed. So it will be at a major milestone. Okay, so it's important for the client to determine the times of cash outflow, okay, for which provision had to be made. So this is important, particularly when towards the end of the month. Normally payment is provided maybe towards the end of the month or early of the month. Okay, so every month there would be progress provided by the contractor. Okay, so this month 10%, 12%, 13%, 14%. So payment would be given to the contractor based on the percentage that has been more or less estimated. Okay, so the first month supposed to complete 10%, for example. Okay, the client needs to make sure ada duit tu. Okay, so needs to make sure the cash is there according to the provisions that has been made. Okay, so this is very important. Okay, and then the client would decide on the type of contract. Okay, so what are the type of contract that you might have heard? Cuba bagi contoh sikit. Any type of contract that you have heard, that you have known? Tak ada, tak pernah dengar. Have you heard of lump sum? Lump sum contract ke?
Yes.
Kan? Bill of quantity ke? Okay, negotiable ke? So those are type of contract. Okay, so the most common one we might have heard will be bill of quantity. Okay, so based on bill of quantity or based on lump sum, right? So another item that you might have heard also would be I would call it procurement system, but you might also refer it to contract. Design and build, and then design bid build, traditional contracting. Okay, so there are slight difference between both of it. Okay, so design build, okay, for example, the first one, traditional. Okay, so traditional procurement system. I would sekejap procurement system. So procurement system, the most common one will be the traditional. So whereby we design, we bid, we build. Okay, so and then we have and then we have design and build. Okay, and then we have turnkey maybe. Design, build, turnkey, almost there. And then we have build, operate, transfer. So okay, so something like that. So, well, sometimes these things, okay, this procurement system is used interchangeably as contract system and so on. But to ease the understanding is usually I would separate it. Okay, so one I call it the procurement system. So procurement system is basically how we get the contract. Okay, so how contracts are signed between the stakeholders. So, for example, traditional is whereby the client would have a contract with the consultant first. Okay, so design is provided, and then there will be tender. Okay, so bidding, or tender, and once the tender is won by the main contractor, then the main contractor could start the work. So you can see that the phases design, and then tendering and contracting, 3 stages yang berbeza and different organisation. Okay, so designer will be just designers. Once design dah siap, it will be turned into the contract document, tender document first. Okay, so tender, open tender or whatsoever, or closed tender. So normally open tender lah kalau traditional, open tender. And when it has been won over by the contractor, then contractor bill. So actually traditional is the most commonly used procurement system to obtain the contract or to sign the contract between the different stakeholders. So cuma traditional is not that effective in creating teamwork. Okay, so because your consultant, they couldn't care less of what contractor does. And contractor, so basically you create environment which is kind of rivalry juga lah. It's kind of blame putting. Okay, so putting blame on each other if there are delays and so on. So everyone is only concerned of their own self, right? So this one we are trying, or basically the industry is trying to move away from here. Cuma one good thing out of it, biasanya traditional, it requires open tender. So good thing about open tender, it provides opportunity to anyone to bid for the project. So dia bukan selected. So it's open. So dia ada pro and cons lah basically. Okay, so traditional. Design and build is where you have the client, and then the client is in contract with the design and build entity. Okay, so design and build entity ni maksudnya it can be two company but doing the design and build together, or it can be joint venture. So meaning to say that they work closely together. So for this kind of project, it can be a fast track project because once the designer design the foundation, contractor dah masuk. The contractor could go in to build the foundation while the designer is designing the first level, second level, third level. So design and build, we can do it as a fast track project because you can design, build, design, build, design, build. The activities of this could be run simultaneously. Tapi yang ni tak boleh. For traditional, you need to complete the entire set of design so that it can turn into the bid, and then it will be bidded by the contractor and winning contractor bill. So separate stages by itself. So this one, it could be in a fast track. So turnkey is similar, or sometimes we call design and build turnkey. Turnkey is where the project is completed until the owner, the end product is basically you just turn the key. Okay, so the entire set, build until or turnkey. Okay, build, operate, transfer is basically the one that we usually use for highway. Okay, this is where basically, especially highway, it costs a lot of money. Okay, so it costs a huge cost, right? So what the government does, the government allows, or the government provides the avenue for contractor to build. And because the construction is paid by the contractor, they are allowed to operate. Okay, so itu yang concession period tu. The duration for concession, 10 years, 20 years of operate tu. Okay, so that's why we pay the toll. So we pay the toll for the maintenance work and for the construction work that have been done by the contractor to one point until the concession period completed. If it's 30 years without any extension, then it's 30 years. Okay, so 30 years of collecting toll and for the construction of the road and also for the maintenance of the road. And if the concession ends in 30 years, then it will be transferred back to the government. And once it is transferred back to the government, dah tak ada toll lah. Okay, so basically a lot of it basically to do with tol lah ataupun road highway construction. Okay, build, operate, transfer. For building pula is what we call PFI. Okay, private finance initiative tu. So PFI functions more or less something like this. The contractor or the private entity will be given the avenue to build and then to operate it, and they are allowed to claim certain amount each month and so on for maintenance and so on. And to one point, concession period ended, then transfer back to the government or to the client yang sebenar. Okay, so if you can see the way I describe this is different than type of contract. So type of contract, I will see how do you sign off the contract dengan contractor tu. Okay, so do you pay them lump sum? So for example, lump sum is where the contractor will say, okay, these are the activities that is needed, or the whole thing, okay, it costs you 1 million. Lump sum, macam tu je, 1 million provided. So that is how you sign the contract. So the contract is based on lump sum, or the common one based on bill of quantity. Okay, so the contractors will list down everything based on each work task and based on the material and so on. And this is the pricing for the contract. Okay, so the client would, if agreed to the bill of quantity type of contract, so the payment will be based on bill of quantity. Okay, so that is type of contract. So it's slightly is different. Okay, so type of contract, how are you tying the contract? Okay, so whether are you paying using BQ ke, are you paying using lump sum ke, are you paying using this profit sharing type of contract? Okay, but the arrangement of a procurement system is how are you attaining the contract to? Okay, so how are the contractors being assigned? So this one could reflect a lot on the role or task of each of the entity. Okay. All right, so obviously this one is decided by the client. Okay, how are they going to engage them? How are they going to pay? All that decided by the client. Any procurement of any M&E as well, and also any decision that may affect the overall project duration. Okay, so that is done by the client. Okay, so for the designers, basically the designers, the planning will be pretty short. So the designers carry out their responsibility to prepare the plans used by the client in taking strategic decision. So the idea is basically for the designers to manage their own resources. Okay, they need to allocate who will be doing which design. So the activities to be planned by the designers, when they are coming up with the design, they need to conduct investigation, ground investigation, soil investigation, the location, the locality investigation, desk study. This needs to be done. Okay, so there are certain time frame to be provided before they can come up with a drawing. Okay, so and also investigation, you need to hire the investigator lah. Okay, so you can see some organizations such as soil investigation. Okay, so soil testing. So you need to hire them, and tests need to be conducted and so on. Okay, so there should be an allocation of time for that. Design calculation. Okay, so a drawing. So you need to do the analysis, come up with the design, and you need to also attain any approval. Okay, so especially, but nowadays, I think most of the approval is done through the one-stop center and the local council. Those days dulu, if you require the endorsement of the M&E, for example, for the fire, you need to go to the bomber. And if you require the drawing to be approved by the drainage drawing, so you need to go to the Jabatan Saliran. So you need to go to different agencies to attain the approval. But now, normally, it is submitted through one entire document at the local council itself. Majlis lah. Okay, so whether it's Majlis Bandaraya ke, Majlis Daerah, so they will do, it's one-stop center lah. Basically, submit kat sana and they will be delegated and so on. Okay, so anyhow, this needs to be attained before anything. Okay. preparation of specification. Okay, so once you have had the drawing, usually we will provide it together with the specification. So specification is a detailed description of the material. Okay, so in your drawing, that is only that much you can represent in the material. Okay, so of a material. So for example, tiling. Okay, so but in your specification, you will intentionally or you will specifically highlight what type of tiling do you want. Okay, so the specification needs to be read together with the drawing, or the drawing needs to be read together with the specification so that you can have the right image, right idea about the material that you're going to use or need to use. Okay, so very important. If you read the drawing without specification, you might just order some cheap material, whereas actually in the specification, it is some high-end material. Then you are not following the contract, and there will be dispute lah nanti. So there will be a problem. Okay. And then tender program. Okay, so once you have that drawing, you have specification, then you can come up with how long the tender would be. So you basically can come up with a tender document, and you can plan for how long the tender would be. So when opening tender bila, tutup tender bila, and so on. Okay, and preparation of any quality system. Okay, all right. So for the contractor, okay, so for the contractor, it is divided into estimating. Okay. Mm-mm. Okay, so for the contractor, it is divided between planning at the estimating stage and also production planning. So, okay, as a contractor, you imagine that one, you will come in during the tendering stage, okay? And if you have won the tender, then you will move on to production planning, right? So the contractor would require planning at the estimation stage. So when you go for tender, you can't just estimate suka hati that harga and put a pricing. You need to be clear because that is what you have tendered for. So that is what you have estimated. If sangat kurang, then you will be basically not having much profit, or sometimes it will go to the point that you will lose profit. Okay, so it's very dangerous. So estimation should be done as close as you can lah to the reality though. Okay, so in estimating, planning involve preparation of work program and proposal on construction methods. For production, basically planning allocates resources. Plans must be catered to changes. So at the tendering stage, you would look into how are you going to carry out the project. Okay, so because once you beli the tender document, you can see the drawing, you can see the specification, you can plan dah. Basically, how are you going to fulfill the items in the contract document, and also you would have BQ in there as well. So you can see how are you going to do that, what activities are involved, so you can come up with the pricing. Okay, so these are the material and these are the method we're going to hire, equipment apa, machinery apa, then you can actually plan for the estimation. Okay, and if you won the tender, okay, if you won the tender, then you can actually plan for the resources in detail. Okay, so who will be the main con, subcon, and any detailed planning. Okay, so you need to also check on potential variation. Okay, so mistakes and weather. So variation ni sometimes as a contractor, you might find items that are required to be done on the site, but it is not in the contract. So basically at the front end tu terlepas pandang lah. Okay, so this is what we call variation or variation order, whereby the pricing is not in the contract. So if it's required to be done, you can actually file for variation order, goes through the designer. If the client agrees, that will be the additional cost apart from the contract. Okay. All right. So far, any question? Okay, so in general, the main parties who plan would be the client, the designers, the contractors. Okay, so except the contractors, there would be two stages that they plan, whether it's at the estimation stage or whether it's at the production planning stage. Okay, so estimation stage would be a stage where the tendering contractors place in their estimation. But because you're going to place an estimation costing though, you need to get proper evidence about it lah, proper pricing for it. Okay, and production is for contractor who have won over the tender. Okay. All right. Before we end the class, okay, so just one question. What are the other documents that, or what are the other elements in a contract document? So in a contract document, or in a tender document lah, tender document nanti turn into a contract document. So what do we have? We have this drawing in the contract document. We have specification. If there are any quality standard that we want to request, what else do we have in the contract document? Apa lagi content dalam contract document?
Bill of quantity.
Bill of quantities. Lagi? Ada tak lain lagi? Sebab tak ada kat sini. So I think I need to highlight just to conditions of contract. Okay, so that's very important. Okay, conditions of contract is pretty standardized standard. If you're talking about government project, would be JKR 203 or JKR 203A. Okay, so PAM and so on. Conditions of contract ni ialah if you have come across, it states who is the superintending officer, okay, of a project, and then what would allow a contractor to apply for extension of time, EOT. And then any dispute, how would it be settled? So conditions of contract, it can be macam in government project, macam JKR 203 or 203A. And then you have PAM document. For private, normally they use architect's condition of contract, CIDB. Okay, so more or less dia tak adalah jauh beza sangat. More or less is quite, the conditions are similar. Cuma if in a project or a client wants to make some changes, then maybe they would add an addendum to a certain condition. For this project, okay, addendum dia ialah ni. So it needs to be provided together. So this is very important because it sets the condition. Especially if you have delay, how can you apply for extension? What are the reasoning you can provide so that extension could be granted? Kalau tak, you will need to pay the penalty, the LAD. So this is very important sebab tadi nampak we don't have it here. So conditions of contract is part of the contract document tu. Okay, all right. So for any question for today's class?
No, I don't.
All right. Okay. So if there are none, terkejut so far. Okay. All right. So if there are none, we can end the class for today, and I'll see you all next week. Until now belum ada schedule lagi kan? So if anything, I think if you know of the date earlier than me, then just put it in the group. If you know of the date of the test earlier than me. If I know of the date earlier than you, then I'll place it in the group. Okay. So with that, we end the class. Thank you for attending and have a good day ahead.